begins week number 3 with Purple versus Gallon. We have a 10-deck format, which requires all the players before their series to ban 6 decks or 6 classes blind. And now they're left with 4 classes each, and then we play best of 5 Conquest, except they have 4 decks instead of 3 with Conquest. So they choose how to self-isolate. In a sense, they have even more options than the traditional best of 5 Conquest, because you can choose to not play a deck entirely or try to play it one time and then proceed to put it on the icer for a while.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, honestly, and we're seeing a lot of Shaman, Paladin, Druid. The 4th is a little bit contested. It depends on like what kind of Hunter they bring or what kind of Paladin Shaman they bring, whether or not they want to leave something else up. Hunter's been the 4th most popular one, but Priest is in there. We're seeing some Mage as well for players that brings more aggressive lineups that can capitalize on that. But I just like seeing the variations in the different Shamans and Paladin lists. Yes, we have Murloc Paladins, Highlander Paladins, Totem Shamans, Galakon Shamans, Control Shamans, and each individual tech decisions that go along with that. How many Hungry Crabs do you include, Dan? That's another big question that's on everybody's minds when it comes to this format, because of people expecting Paladin to be played the most. So I'm looking forward to it. It's something different. It's a change of pace, and the players are being tested in a way that they don't usually get tested, which is, they can't just perfect these meta decks. You can't just go on ladder and practice, because you're not going to get good practice, because you're just going to get rolled by Demon Hunter what seems like every game. So I'm looking forward to see all the shenanigans that happened today.
Yeah, and we'll see some variation between a deck lists, because, like you said, some people were trying to corner the classes that they were going to leave up. In a way, this creates a pretty complex set of decision trees that could happen, right? If some people, for example, chose to leave up every weapon class and then brought like Acidic Swampoos and Harrison Jones in all of their decks, then that's one way that they can like narrow it down, because they could leave up, Warrior and Rogue and other classes that like usually will have weapons almost guaranteed in every one of their decks. In this case, Rogue usually hero powers. So it's pretty fascinating to see like how people are like, well, I'm just going to put Hungry Crab in like all of my decks and really try to punish anybody that brings Murlocs of any capacity. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we love to see in a way. Like part of the 10-deck experimentation week here is to challenge the players and see what creative ideas they can come up with when they can't just, bring a conventional lineup. Because if we were to be very brutally honest, last week's Last Hero Standing, while there was a little bit of changes, it was kind of minimal relative to an entire format shift that you would want to see. If we're going to bring a different format, we would want to see somebody, or some people rather, just bring off-the-wall strategies, which several of them did this weekend.
Yeah, several of them did, and going in this first matchup, Purple's coming in as number 1 seed. It was Zalay and last week, Bloody Face in the previous week, and now Purple, who hasn't even had a top 8 appearance, took the number 1 seed. So he has to be doing something right, and he went against the grain with a couple of things, but we did see like a lot of his strategies falter a little bit in Europe, but we're kind of in a different environment. There's a lot more Galakron Shamans, there's a lot less Totem Shamans. So the Highlander Paladin from Purple specifically, I think, is pretty well positioned.
All right, well, with that, let's go ahead and check out what their first decks are going to be for our first series here. Remember, we're talking about 2 players who aren't just the top competitors in their region, but also good friends. And so we have our T-Mobile deck spotlight. I believe we're going to be featuring Purple's Highlander Paladin, considering that this might be the final Highlander deck from the Saviors of Olddoom expansion back in 2019. And we can see a lot of competitive play. If Purple continues to advance, this might be the most time in the sun that we'll see Sir Finley of the Sands be played that wasn't randomly generated through some other means of Hearthstone.
Yeah, like a fish flinger or the underlight angling rod that gives you a Sir Finley. It's not even activated, it just plays a 2/3. But yeah, I like this deck. When we were doing some practice with this deck yesterday, or you were playing it, it does have some hands that are just fantastic, right? The combination of like Magic Carpet, History Buff, and the Sand Wasp Queen, those types of like miniature combos can gain you a lot of board presence, and they also have a lot of capitalization on big boards, right? Like Pharaoh's Blessing, Blessing of Kings. So it is interesting. Obviously, I don't think that the Highlander Paladin is at like quite the power level of, say, Highlander Hunter or Highlander Mage. I do think that this deck can hold its own. Its problem comes in it does stuff like slightly weaker than everything else. It can't have that, you know, burst damage like Highlander Hunter. It doesn't have like the huge value swings like Highlander Mage, but it can do those things. They're just fewer and far between. So I'm excited to see this deck in action. And of course, right at the top of that list, a good old Hungry Crab.
Yeah, Hungry Crab. Maybe even sometimes on your own minions for tempo, like just because you're trying to get early game board presence in this low curve Highlander Paladin. And there's a lot of different ways that you can combo and make sure that you can connect to those high power cards like Dragon Queen Alexstrasza. And a lot of times I like using Zephyrus as a finisher in this deck because you're just going to get onto the board so quickly given all of those cheap minions in your deck. So that is your T-Mobile deck spotlight, helping you stay connected to what matters most. And what TJ didn't also mention was yesterday I was having a little bit of trouble. My internet provider has been disconnecting a lot. It's actually been interrupting my climb very much, but saved by my T-Mobile cellular reception so I can reconnect very temporarily to see that the Face Hunter has immediately just ended his turn as quickly as possible, hoping I wouldn't.
Yeah, well, that's that the 4G, 5G tethering can save you, especially now. The internet service providers seem to be bogged up a little bit, so it's helping you stay connected to your Hearthstone matches, Dan. And right now, that is what matters most.
Yes, definitely. Well, here we go into game number one. It is the Hunter versus the Paladin. Gallon, of course, playing the aggressive Dragon Paladin featuring Stone Tuskboar. We saw some of this last week. Hey, and there it is, Stone Tuskboar, a 1-mana 4/4 charger. That's really powerful on turn 2.
Dan, it's a thing of beauty. It really is.
Oh yeah, it's great.
Oh, this deck, Monsanto brought this deck, and it did not perform very well. And I think that it didn't quite live up to its true potential. This deck can deal lots of damage very quickly and have very difficult board states to deal with if you fall behind. The problem with this deck, I think, is if you do fall behind, your ability to come back in the game is limited, and you often have to switch your game plan. Like many Face Hunter decks of the past, or many aggressive Hunter decks of the past, you have to switch your game plan from try and gain control of the board to deal the maximum amount of damage to their faces I can and try and end the game through that. But you can see purple. I mean, the Highlander Paladin, you saw all the 1-drops and the 2-drops. It does curve out well. The minions are not necessarily like super high power level like the Beaming Sidekick on 1, but just putting things there to contest these minions that don't often have an immediate impact on the board from the Hunter is the best strategy. And I wonder, the Waste Warden's obviously there for, you know, decks like Spell Druid or Token Druid, which you can kill a big board of Glowfly Swarms or, you know, Treants on curve, essentially. But it may have some use in this matchup because Gallon does run like a couple beasts, runs a couple dragons. So maybe Waste Warden can help Purple gain a little bit of tempo as this match goes on. But right away, Gallon's like, well, I mean, it was a fun game while it lasted. He does not have Unleash the Hounds in this deck, which means that he's already, Purple's at 30 health. It's turn 3. Gallon's already on the phase game plan. You can see him like, what do I even do in this situation?
Right. There's ways you can play quicker, and there's ways you can play slower. Quicker would be like to play as many minions as he can onto the board, given that he knows that his prisoner will awaken. But almost anything he does gets challenged really easily. If he tries to go slow, he's just going to get overrun by Paladin's aggression because he knows 2 more Sand Wasps are in the hand. Dwarven Sharpshooter and Hero Power also seems very slow. So I wonder if Gallon instead is just going to try and fight back onto the board as best he can here. The Snake Trap and the Stone Toast board, what it allows him to do is kind of make Purple a little scared about both possibilities, because Explosive Trap is in Gallon's deck and is one of his only ways to deal with a wider board here.
Yeah, I like the other option that you kind of mentioned was just play as many minions, like double Dwarven Sharpshooter and Stone Tusk board to try and gain board back. But let's say his board gets picked apart, all of a sudden Snake Trap goes way down in value. So I like getting value of the Snake Trap now because these snakes will contest the board. And maybe next turn he can follow it up with a double Dwarven Sharpshooter Hero Power or double Fairy Dragon if Purple, say, misses a turn of development for whatever reason. But definitely a tough spot for Gallon. Because Purple also, the Highlander Paladin does have like a decent curve. It just kind of scales up. It's got a pretty even distribution, and its late game is also reasonably powerful. And Purple's just going to load up the board here, and Gallon, not really much option. This Imprisoned Felmaw doesn't even have too many good targets to hit. And the 5/4 on board is not really that much board presence when you're staring at some 2/1s.
Well, they are 2/1s, and those are the strongest minions on the board. This gives the Dwarven Sharpshooter some very reasonable stats onto the board, because the 1/3s will pick apart all of these 1-health minions. And Purple is not like out of gas, but both players are around the same amount of card resources in hand, except Purple able to draw the Underlight Angling Rod. And this is a new card from the Ashes of Outland expansion that's after your hero attacks, add a random Murloc to your hand. And that card has impressed me a lot during playtesting. And it might subtly be one of Paladin's most versatile cards right now in the class.
Yeah, it's ends up being quite good, and there's even some players that are playing Murloc Paladin that are including like the Horde Pillager to increase the amount of value to the game, because the aggressive Paladin strategies lost Divine Favor, which was huge. Their ability to generate cards or draw cards is very minimal, and Underlight Anger kind of fills that, where it allows you to fight for board while also kind of getting a little bit more card value. But it looks like Gallon here might finally be able to at least attempt to win back the board. But this Stormhammer's fantastic. I don't want to say anything bad about Stormhammer, but this has to be the most valuable Stormhammer in the history of Stormhammers. If Gallon's going to want to chip away at the rest of this life total from Purple, who's still at 25, which is a lot considering this is one of the most aggressive decks in the metagame with Gallon's Hunter. Ooh.
Well, Purple has ways to build the board through the Murloc Tidecaller, their Murger Gurgle.
Wow, Dan, that was beautiful. Beautiful pronunciation.
Thank you. I'm just trying to, be more mindful of that. I don't want to offend any Murlocs.
Murger.
It is 2020.
Murger. That's right. And don't you forget it.
Yeah, Gallon trying to weigh what's most important. Probably just taking off the maximum amount of pressure and just going aggressive. Corrosive Breath already dealt 3. He can deal 5 more, and that puts his opponent down to 17.
Yeah. I definitely like the plan here from Gallon. He's going to have to weave in these hero powers. Right? We said that the game plan, once he didn't gain the full control of the board, has to be to try and piece together some face damage. And he's got 2 more guaranteed swings left of the Stormhammer with Fairy Dragon played next turn. He also has tracking, which I'm trying to look through the deck to see what the best outcome from tracking would be. And honestly, it's hard to tell. Like Scavenger's Ingenuity could find Stone Tusk board, which is damage, or Phase Stalker, which could pull Explosive Trap out, or Primordial Explorer. Well, okay.
Yeah, I was about to say that Zephyrs can go for weapon removal right here, because it's clear that Gallon's been saving like Fairy Dragon in the hand for a while.
Yep.
So Purple made the very easy read that Gallon's on the burn plan, destroy the dragon weapon, Stormhammer, so that way they can't get the damage consistent every single turn. And that would have very firmly ended the game. I like that he's squeezing the Truth of a Champion as well, because my original thought was, well, this offers what, like Harrison Jones, if you just play it on 7. And then he had the Pharaoh's Blessing as like a way to back it up. Like if somehow he found like this giant big amount of tempo through like double evasive Fellwing, then he just have this giant taunt minion in the way. So overall, the Highlander Paladin gets a very easy victory for purple to start things off.
Yeah, and it seems like the quote-unquote like weaker decks, Paladin and Shaman, getting wins with those is crucial to finding success in just matches in general. And so starting off with a Paladin win is actually a pretty big deal, especially considering that Gallon, I believe, has Murloc Paladin in his lineup, and Purple's packing a lot of Hunger Crabs. So Murloc Paladin lives and dies by the early tempo that they get in a game. If their first board gets removed, they oftentimes have very difficult time coming back, and that's why the Hunger Crabs have been included, because players knew that Paladin would be left up. They knew that a lot of players would be bringing Murloc Paladin, and so they knew that Hunger Crab would often be a good choice on a lot of these decks.
Definitely, and I think that with these Murlocs out there getting that early game board presence, the Hunger Crab becomes even more critical. But how bad does it feel if you're going to be like left with decks that have Murloc hate cards, and your opponent doesn't even have Murlocs in their decks like Gallon has with his Hunter, for example. But remember, as we mentioned, he doesn't have to play Hunter even for the rest of the series. If he were to win, he could just play his Paladin, Shaman, and Druid. So leaving up that extra options makes it a little bit trickier to target, but also gives players exit plans in case they feel like one deck is way too weak. Because I think that's ultimately how people would have approached this lineup if they knew that you were forced to win with classes like Paladin, Shaman. They could like all in and hard target that, and I think that wouldn't lead to a very interesting.
No. But let's get into game number 2 here. It is the Spell Druid from Gallon. Pretty traditional Spell Druid. Does have the one copy of Exotic Mount Seller, one copy of, or obviously the Kilthos. Nice.
Yes.
Got him.
Important to challenge, but now here comes the level 2 boss, Acidic Swamp Ooze. And he can challenge it with Power of the Wild, which I imagine he wants to, but that incidentally leads him into boss level 3. Zixor, the Apex Predator, gets a very nice clean kill on this, or he could use the Dwarven Sharpshooter if he's lucky. Seems like the Apex Predator, Zixor, is just like better since it introduces more power, although it would give Gallon no ability to use his hero power. However, Gallon does pick up his Overgrowth.
Okay, so the Overgrowth, he's got 2 of the 0 mana spells in hand, which means that he's got Kilthos plus Overflow on 7. The biggest thing is, do you coin the Overgrowth? And I would probably say no, because he has no immediate follow-up for next turn. He'd be on 6 mana. So I think he just has to take the damage from this Acidic Swamp Ooze, hero power, Overgrowth next turn, and hope that he can pop off his, what would be 7 mana turn?
Yeah. He does have alternatives, too. He could, if he feels like he's too far behind, go for a coin Glowfly Swarm following turn if he needed to fight for board. But with only 4 spells in hand right now after that coin, he would have a 5th most likely. It's like he's just going to go for that Overgrowth and hope that this doesn't hurt too badly. But Purple's board, with a very nice clean curve, is just starting to get hard for the Druid to answer. And Gallon, he can build up a board, but if he just builds up 2/2s with nothing else, like no taunts, there's a chance that Purple can just still answer this.
Yeah, so he really needs to hit. He's got 2 mana remaining because the 2 coin effects will activate it. So it picks up 2 cheap spells, so now can go off again, so he can get the Glowfly Swarm down. And a Bog Beam, it'll stop there though.
Right. Seems like at least the Bog Beam is nice to shut down the poisonous minion from the Emerald Explorer. However, Gallon does have this Varanus. So try as you might, Gallon, set up a big Kilthos that doesn't die on the board. but that Kael'thas is going to die. And then Gallon is stuck with playing a very modest curve with Glowfly Swarm and no soul.
Waits for no one.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I wonder if he just stops here.
Because he wants to save it for the exotic Mount Seller.
To save those cheap spells for exotic Mount Seller. If he played Ironbark now and then Glowfly Swarmed, okay, I guess he's got double Glowfly Swarm. But this Glowfly Swarm is only 4, so it will, at least, not all of it will get picked apart, but a good amount of it get picked apart. If with the Varanus coming down, he'll lose 2 of them, so he'll only have 2 left. That's actually quite poor, honestly.
Right, and there's nothing left for the exotic Mount Seller on the following turn. So
yeah,
Gallon is completely dependent on this immediate board that he's played.
I wonder.
Kind of hard pressed to find a better play than Varanus right here. Everything else seems either off curve and inconvenient, or just kind of too weak. I think the Varanus cleans up the Kael'thas, which is definitely the highest priority.
excuse me, he'll have 3 left. For some reason, I thought that he'd be able to fit in Hero Power, but obviously not. Oh, okay. Well, double Soul of the Forest means he could kill this Varanus and still have 6 Treants remaining. Or he could do it the other way, which is 3 Treants that have Death Rattle summon a Treant. It depends on kind of how he wants to sequence that. I think with Savage Roar in hand, you'd rather have the 6.
Yes, the only thing is how can Purple punish this with his Highlander Hunter? I'm thinking about, obviously, Zephyrus, but I don't think you're beating that ever anyways. Waste Warden. Waste Warden would be very problematic if all of his Treants just kind of get blown up. I think that might be it.
That's it. But I think, like you mentioned with Zephyrus, I don't know if you can reasonably play around the Waste Warden and still expect to win. I think you just have to make what the strongest board possible, but there's still the argument of what do you think is the strongest board possible. And it looks like Gallon is going to go for a mixture?
Yeah, a halfway play, although it's still kind of has the same weakness as before.
Yeah?
This was very meticulously done for a multitude of reasons, and I think it's because Gallon anticipates that next turn he might have to play Glowfly Swarm again, and he wants to try and maximize his board space every single turn.
Yeah, but Glowfly Swarm will only be if he draws a spell, which he's guaranteed to draw a spell. It'll only be a 2 Glowfly Swarm.
Right.
So,
but that would be if he didn't draw any card draw. So I think he was keeping in mind that if he picked up Fungal Fortunes or Rising Winds, there was a potential way for him to make a full board again and then set up for Savage Roar. And I think that's optimistic, obviously, because it could have very, very easily have not gone that way. But with this exotic Mount Seller and Power of the Wild, there might be this opportunity for Gallon to start seizing back the board. And I kind of like getting the Mount Seller out just because it's so expensive, and then every card you draw will summon something else.
yeah.
The alternative is to Glowfly Swarm this turn, but kind of like what you were saying, TJ, it's a very weak one, and there are cards that Gallon could pick up that can make it much better.
Yeah. The problem is, Gallon is essentially out of board generating spells. He only plays the 1 Mount Seller, and he doesn't play the Force Aid. Oh, okay. That's
annoying.
good.
That's really annoying, actually.
So,
oh, hold on. Unleash the Hounds. So Unleash the Hounds plus Faceless Corruptor deals with a lot of this. I'm not sure if it kills everything. No, it shouldn't. Not even close.
also,
kind of close.
We've just been corrected by our producer Abar. Treants actually don't have a minion type. They're called Treants, and they're sort of a tribe, but they don't have a minion type. So Waste Warden doesn't clear Treants.
Oh, you are correct. It doesn't have a text box at the very bottom of the card that says Treant. I think we got it mixed up because there's cards like the Dendrologist that says if you control a tree ant,
Yes.
discover a spell. So it can be tricky like that.
Yeah. But thanks MVP Abar for continuously correcting my Hearthstone knowledge time after time, including in playtesting sessions. So,
Quickly.
but yeah, so it was just Zephyr's out. That's good to know.
Good to know. And, the whole point about games like Hearthstone is you learn something new every day.
Yep.
Oh boy. Glowfly Swarm being a very inferior version to Force of Nature at this point.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier, Glowfly Swarm is the last form of minion generation outside of Rising Winds that Gallon even has in the deck. So this is a tough decision. I honestly think that he might need to wait one more turn. Because if he just goes for the 2 treants here, he pushes 3, he puts him down to 16. One of the treants will be removed. He's not even setting up lethal with a Savage Roar. That's the only Savage Roar he has in the deck. He might... he's got 1 Overflow and 2 Fungal Fortunes left in the deck. Fungal Fortunes would absolutely be the best draw because then he can play the Glowfly Swarm immediately. But if he doesn't pick that up next turn, then he gives up all chances of maybe finding an out. Because purple would go down to 13 here. Okay. That'll do it!
Yeah, tough game here for Gallon, and purple is up 2-0. Gallon will heal all of these Zixor Primes. And that should do it. All these cards picked up just way too late to have impact. Obviously, great to have Fungal Fortunes later on, or earlier, but it's way too late, and that's going to end game number 2. Purple's up 2-0 very quickly.
Yeah, that was quite a beating. Now, granted, while Gallon had a decent opening hand, his follow-up on the Kael'thas was not fantastic, and he was sort of forced to go in on that turn and not wait for like one more draw. And, just the way he constructed his deck, he was kind of just out of the minion generation. If he maybe included a Forest Aid or something that he could have picked up, maybe he stays in that game if he can clear up with like the Moonfire, Starfall, and Bog Beam. But I mean, when you're out of stuff and the only thing you can do for the rest of the game is make Rising Winds Eagles, and that's it, then you can call that one pretty confidently.
That's right. And so now purple has just his Druid and Shaman remaining. As we were discussing earlier, purple will be playing a Galakon Shaman that has Evolve packages included into it if he chooses to play it for the next game. And then he too also has a Spell Druid. And so with these 2 decks remaining, I wonder what Gallon's going to choose, because he doesn't have the same Shaman. He has a Totem Shaman featuring Totemic Reflection, which allows him to copy his totems, and then Splitting Axe, which is very fun. Purple's going to turn to that Shaman deck. You'd love to see it. This is the first time we'll be seeing Shaman played in Grandmasters this season. And I gotta say that this Shaman does feel like it has winnable moments. TJ was playing specifically Purple's decks and was finding a lot of opportunities to grab as much board as possible very quickly through things like Mutate. So don't sleep on it, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. It is. The problem is its combos are inconsistent and reliant on very specific cards, and very specific setups.
Right.
So, like Desert Hare into the Knuckles is obviously one of the biggest tempo plays you can make, but you either have to set up your Knuckles first and then play your Desert Hare, which can feel too slow at times. Or your Desert Hares just have to stick, which is not very reliable. The one thing that Purple has going for him is that the Spell Druid from Gallon doesn't necessarily have a ton of removal in the early game, and the removal that it does have to spend means they don't have fodder, additional spells for Glowfly Swarm, or additional cheap spells later on in the game to couple with Kael'thas or Exotic Non-Seller. So, but Purple kept the Bogshot Clacker and the Desert Hare, which means he will have the opportunity to go for Temple. And if it sticks, then he has the Bogshot Knuckles the box by Knuckles, excuse me, to kind of drive it home. And Gallon has essentially what is a dead turn.
Yeah, I
don't
love
know
the
about this one,
commentary
Dan.
that we had from Lorinda while we were playtesting. He's like, whatever happened to naming cards like Knife Juggler as opposed to Bogshot Clacker? Like,
Box by Knuckles.
To which TJ says, bless you. And I feel like there are some pretty out there names. TJ was like, I didn't even know what this card was called. I've like seen it before, but yeah, it feels like a lot of times you're piecing together like an arena deck. And look at that. We have a double evolve play, the Bronze Warden plus the Light Spawn coming out here with some pretty impressive stats this early on. If Gallon goes for an overgrowth, he's willing to accept some big damage on the backswing here.
Yeah, this is turn 3. You look at this particular opening from Purple, where he has 13 power on board and even more health on turn 3, right. And you're like, why is this deck not played more often?
Right, because when you hit the power spikes, it's pretty impressive. However, you saw that Purple also almost had a potentially disastrous evolve on the other side where he got Keeper of the Grove as a 2/2. So, and that's kind of what you were talking about, TJ. The inconsistencies of the deck might even just be the fact that the payoff isn't even that consistent in itself.
Yeah, but this curve from Purple is
right.
The Devoted Maniac.
I wanted to actually ask
clean
about
up.
that. Was there merit to Gallon just going for a Glowfly Swarm that previous turn? Because he could be in trouble here.
Yeah, it would have been a 6 Glowfly.
Right, and he does have this double Iron Bark to protect him, which is what he is relying upon.
Well played.
However, Gallon's like, there's a chance. I'm dead, aren't I? You're technically at 26 effective hit points. I don't think your opponent has that much going on. Purple does have some order to consider as well. Because if he attacks with the box by Knuckles, it will immediately evolve his board, versus I think he wants to make sure to get the trades and then decide.
Yeah. This is actually difficult. Because Shield of Galakrond, he would have only 6 damage remaining. If he equips Bonks by Knuckles now, he would trade in Light Spawn, Devoted Maniac to the Taunt, and then he would have a 3-drop and a 1-drop left, and of course the 5-drop. He couldn't even value trade over anything else. He can just try and like trade in the Bog and the Clacker and then Knuckles. Alright, he's just going to go for the value trades and try and get as much Knuckles value as he possibly can on the higher cost minions.
That makes sense. Finds Hogger and the Rotnest Drake. Oh.
Okay. I mean, the play that stuck out to me first was the Rising Wind Soul of the Forest.
Okay, that does look pretty solid to me.
I don't think you want to give up a huge amount of tempo by like playing Overflow this turn, but you know, what do I know? I'm just a caster.
Well, Gallon's planning turns down the line, and I think he's saying that Overflow is too hard to play, and I could be reactive through things like Starfall.
Yeah.
And Gallon is playing with a lot of foresight. For example, that Moonfire on that Light Spawn was actually quite brilliant to stop Purple from getting trades 2 turns down the line.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, Gallon's really trying to make the future turns hard for Purple as well. And with this Bog Beam pickup, the double Bog Beam, he does have a board clear available to him. Gonna kill this Hogger off.
Yeah, board clears are important. With the box by
very much so.
Knuckles up.
Now Purple has a second swing with this Bog Spine Knuckles, and has the opportunity to evolve 2 things or just 1 thing, while you have to put pressure onto his opponent's life total.
Yep.
And I think it also is wise to potentially not swing here, and I like this.
Yeah, his Galakron has been invoked twice, so it will summon the 4/4, so he can always upgrade those next turn, which I think is a much bigger swing.
Okay.
He has nothing to generate any minions. See, this is kind of why I like the Soul of the Forest play last turn, because he could have followed up with Overflow. He would have had a board, and then he could follow it up with Overflow and capitalize on it. Because now, Gallon is just hoping... Again, I mentioned in the last game, the only minion generation he has in his deck... Okay, that's insane.
Do you go for the full package? Do you like Invocation of Frost to face?
Invocation Frost to face, Desert Hair Totem, and swing? Or
There's also the possibility of Farsight.
I don't know if Farsight could even pick up anything fantastic here.
Right. I guess the reason why is because Farsight has a possibility of picking up the... What's it called?
Dread Corsair?
Well, Dread Corsair, I was considering that possibility, but there's also the opportunity for him to pick up the Corrupt Elementalist and then finish the Invoke on Galakron. But obviously, that's a very small percentage play. I think you might want to go for the Guaranteed here, which I like.
Yep.
Definitely Desert Hair. Desert Hair Evolve is back in some form. Is it powerful enough to stop one of the most popular decks in Grandmasters this season so far in the Spell Druid? Let's find out, DJ.
What?
Whoa!
So, the Replicatotron, at the end of your turn, transform a neighbor into a copy of this.
What weird contraption is this? How does that interact with Conjured Mirage, which shuffles his elf in the deck? What happens first?
Well, the Conjured Mirage is at the start of turn, so that'll get shuffled into the deck before the Replicatotrons will go off. So that'll have the Conjured Mirage goes back in the deck at the beginning of turn, and then the Replicatotrons transform in at the end of turn. The fact that they're on the far right as well means that the totems will spawn next to it, so he could get value out of his totem. But he'll probably be playing Galakron next turn, but it's just a funny interaction.
Right.
This is not as much power as I think he would have been hoping for.
Right. Which is kind of what we're talking about with the fact that even when you hit your power spikes, they haven't been consistent.
Yeah.
Like now I'm going to go for the Gift of the Wild to get as much board presence as he can. Galakron can't hit its full invocation.
Yeah, this stuff's just going to get cleaned up by the Galakron.
He just draws Conjured Mirage immediately.
Well, I think he's just happy with the... So the Galakron here, each of these are 4/4s, so he could go 1 into the 5/4, 2 into the Kel'Thas, and 3 minutes in Kel'Thas, so he'd be left with a 1/10 and a 3/2 at the end of this, or a 1/10 and a Replicatotron if he wants his Warmaw Challenger to be turned into a Replicatotron. I don't know.
Yeah, actually, that does sound entirely reasonable.
He would push 4.
You do have to consider... You have to kill Kel'Thas's turn, right? You can't let that up.
Yeah.
Finds the Dread Corsair and the Conjured Mirage. So how he positions this will transform things into the Replicator.
Yeah, so this could work with the Contra Mirage. He could actually get value out of the Contra Mirage. But then he wouldn't kill Kel'Thas, so...
Bask in my radiance.
Gon giggling to himself. He's not exactly out of the woods yet either. Gown doesn't have a lot of good stuff going for him right now. Doesn't have that big board.
Okay.
Did I say he didn't have a big board? I said he didn't have a big board yet. Although still, not exactly resilient.
Okay. It'd be 5 Glowflies right now.
What to do?
In this position in the last game, Gallon went for it. Despite having like follow-up for the next turn to protect his Glowflies with like Soul of the Forest this turn. So based on like what he would have done previously, that would be it. but there's only going to be 110 on his side of the board from his perspective. So he actually is going to hold for Soul of the Forest. We'll see how much he's going to get punished by Galakron. And now for purple, that is the last invoke. There's been 3. So these will be 8/8s, but Galen's going to make quite a menacing board next turn. Will the 8/8s be enough? That's kind of the big question here. And Gal can actually clean up. He could Glowfly Swarm, Soul of the Forest, Moonfire, Crystal Power, and just leave the Wormhole Challenger as an attacking minion up on the board.
Right.
So
that's huge.
And he does have the Savage Roar in hand. This is a lot closer than I thought it would be after Purple went for the second Desert Hare Evolve.
Yeah, that Conjure Mirage, kind of just dead weight for Purple because it didn't really do a lot. It stopped one attack. But look at this.
Ooh.
Boku Flesh Shaper arrives with no mutate, but still a very solid minion to play. Does Purple want to play the Flesh Shaper? He could save it, but he's also trying to see if he can push damage here. I imagine that this weapon, he has to be thinking about going face.
Yeah, Galen's all the way down to 11 life after the swing. Whew.
Galen doesn't have that many cards left in his deck. Wild Growth was one of the 6.
Yeah, he has Exotic Mount Seller. That is one of them. He does have...
I think he has like another Overflow in the deck.
Another Overflow, another Rising Winds, another Fungal Fortunes, another Crystal Power.
Right, he's almost just like out of gas. And I think he has to full trade into these elementals. And then I think he wants to Soul the Forest after he's traded everything. So if he Savage Roars, his hero portrait can take out the Stoneclaw Totem. And then he could double trade into those elementals. That's not ideal whatsoever. And I think, like, if this ends up being the case... Oh, once again, going for maximum board pressure.
Yeah. And I like to hold on the Wild Growth here. He has a 1 in 5 to draw the Exotic Mount Seller next turn. So if he draws that, he obviously wants the Wild Growth to be saved for that. Well, there's the Mutate.
Oh, boy.
So this is
That's a big draw.
The 10 drop, so it's going to be Jumbo Imp or the Scrap Junk.
Scrap Imp. Scrap Imp does take a lot of...
Scrap Imp. The Scrap... what's it called?
Jumbo Imp. Jumbo Imp.
No, Jumbo Imp or the other one. The 7/7 taunt that summons a 7/7 taunt on Death Rattle.
Colossus.
There you go.
Wait, is that what it's called? I know what it is. It's like the really annoying minion that I'm big in.
Scrapyard Colossus?
Yeah, I think it is the Colossus.
Oh, wow. Look at that. It is a Scrapyard Colossus. There you go.
Kind of a tough decision here from Purple if he wants to attack. If he attacks the face, he actually does have a top deck opportunity for lethal in the form of his second weapon in the Bogspine Knuckles. It's not guaranteed. And then Galen, if he draws this Fungal Fortunes, he's basically going to be in a fatigue state. He's going to Wild Growth instead of the Fungal Fortunes because he wants to stall for as much time as he can, because if he enters fatigue, he might just die to the weapon.
Yep.
Rising Winds, I mean, that's board presence.
Yeah, I think So the last 3 cards are Crystal Power, Exotic Mount Seller,
Overflow,
and Overflow. Yep.
I wonder.
So
yeah, I kind of wonder if
he can't play
Galen
Fungal Fortunes.
Yeah, now he's certainly. I kind of wonder if Fungal Fortunes was slightly better here. I totally understand the rationale of like not wanting to get into a situation where you have to win the very next turn to watch that. But getting the Rising Winds was a great consolation prize instead of getting the instead of getting the Mount Seller immediately. Gallon going for... he's leaving up the Warmaw Challenger. Farsight gets a little bit deeper. Shield of Galakron, perhaps.
I mean, that's a lot of cleanup on the board.
Oh, yeah. And, you know, this Shield of Galakron chipping away, Gallon down to his last couple cards, and probably fatigue. And I think Purple, if he just, like, gets the attack to face now, he leaves Gallon in a situation where he has Exotic Mount Seller, and he only can play a couple cards, and he can't play his fatigue cards.
Yeah.
Versus, I think if he doesn't attack, I mean, he could also justify cleaning up the 2/2 as well. But if he doesn't attack, then he might be stuck behind taunts, where he gives outs to Gallon by having the Mount Seller summon Silverback Patriarchs and Iron Prisoners.
Yeah, just judging by that point there of if Exotic Mount Seller is the next card and he plays 2 spells and both of them are taunts and you never attack base again, but he holds, and that essentially had to be Exotic Mount Seller. If it any other Crystal Power or Overflow means that nothing happens, right? So now if he draws Exotic Mount Seller next turn, unless he gets like a taunt plus Zixer Prime or something like that off the 2, there's just no way.
Hey. It was that lethals that we were talking about. It was like if he knew that he was going to draw a box, Fine Knuckles, but obviously he did not.
Yep. And that should lock it up, unless a miracle happens here from Gallon.
I supply only the finest.
I mean, there is one possible way if Zixer Prime is able to redeem him.
Yeah, if he played the Fungal Fortunes, he would have just died.
Well, I believe that would be the case. And Purple's going to crush through a 3-0 victory over Gallon. And job well done, but quite the interesting game number 3. And Spell Druid biting the dust twice there could end up being one of the weaker decks, surprisingly, of the lineups that we've seen. We saw Spell Druid also kind of getting cornered in Europe, making it really tough to get those wins. Sometimes it came down to Spell Druid Mirror and who won that.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating, despite the fact that Druid had been overperforming it in the past couple of weeks as well.
Yeah, and the tech decisions that Gallon made for his Druid deck were essentially for the mirror, right? He did include the Starfall. He had very light minion generation with only the Goldfly Swarm and a single Exotic Mount Seller, whereas a lot of players you see going for like a Forest Aid or the second Exotic Mount Seller in its place. And that really came back to bite him in those like long, what ended up being like value board matchups, which is weird that they come down to that, but he just ran out of minions. He ran out of stuff to play at the end, and he was just stuck with these spells in hand and nothing to use those spells to support. So, Purple didn't even have to play his Spell Druid in that series because he realized that he would have been at a disadvantage going up against Gallon's lineup, since Gallon was teching at least his Druid for the mirror matchup and was able to just 3-0 him.
Yeah, so that's going to do it for our first match, but we're going to roll straight into our